Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for another excerpt from the Arkansas Valley uh,
Audubon
Audubon
Society.
Society. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. The Arkansas Valley Audubon Society. I have the great pleasure of being joined by Peg Rooney and Mikele Painter from the Pike National Forest. Michael will be talking with us about the bats of Colorado, a rather seasonal subject. And I want to go ahead and introduce Michael properly. Mikele Painter has been a wildlife biologist for the South Platte Ranger District on the Pike National Forest since 2009. She grew up in Colorado and went to Colorado State University for a bachelor's degree in wildlife biology. She earned a master's degree in forestry at Northern Arizona University, where she studied the foraging ecology of spotted bats on the Kaibab Plateau. In addition to the USDA Forest Service, Michael has worked for several universities, nonprofit conservation groups, and state agencies, all in the western U.S. Conservation and understanding of native species is a central tenet of Michael's career, and she's glad to be a part of an agency like the Forest Service that helps to perpetuate those values for all members of our society. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Michael. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Peg. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks, Bree. I want to welcome you all here tonight and to tell you about the 2022 State of the Birds report. This is a collaborative effort with 33 organizations and agencies discussing bird populations in the United States. And the data shows that over half of all bird species are in decline, and grassland birds are declining the fastest of all. Birds are an indicator of the health of the planet, and if they're in trouble, we're in trouble. So rather than throw up our hands and say, oh my, climate change, environmental degradation, pesticide use, let's do something about it. Some very simple things like put a decal in your window so birds don't collide with the glass. Avoid using pesticides that hurt birds. Um, Advocate for natural open spaces in new residential development. And vote for politicians who will work toward the protection of the environment. And join the Audubon Society. Membership information is on our website, Southern Colorado Birds, abbreviated SOCO, so socobirds.org. Join us in the fight. Do something. Little things matter. And now I'll turn things over to Michael.
Thanks, Peg. Let's see if I can figure out how to present my screen. Let's see, screen sharing is easiest to... All right. Sorry for this little hiccup. I've not used this program before. Sorry. And I also don't have two screens. So sorry for this. Hi, Bree. Can't hear you, Bree. You're on mute.
Would you like to go ahead and I can help project that if you want to send it to me? I can share that if you have something that you can send to me.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, we should have figured this out ahead of time, shouldn't we?
It's okay.
Okay. I just emailed it to you. It should be there in 2 seconds. Oh dear. It says it's sending still. It's not that big of a file. I don't know why it's taking so long. I'm gonna log out and log back in, and hopefully that will make it go faster. All right. Excellent.
Okay, so I have that there for you.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, and apologize for that hiccup.
It's okay.
So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So thanks, everybody, and welcome. I'm glad you're here to listen to a little bit about bats. Bats are a highly successful and diverse group that make up about 1/5 of all mammal species on the planet. They occupy every continent except Antarctica, and they are even found above the Arctic Circle. Bree, you can go ahead and advance to the next.
Okay. Let me go ahead and 1 sec. I'm adding to my apologies. I'm getting a little hiccup on my end, but I'm just sharing that new window here.
Perfect.
Okay.
Finally. You'd think after almost 3 years of this, we'd all have this all figured out, but
Okay, there we go. Would you like me to advance?
no, that's perfect right
Okay,
there.
no
So
problem.
again, thanks for your patience. So yes, bats are amazing. They're found throughout the globe, even above the Arctic Circle. Only place they aren't found is Antarctica. Their unique ability to fly has allowed them to become the only native mammals on many islands like Hawaii and Guam and New Zealand. And although bats share some of the same basic characteristics, they do come in all shapes and sizes, and they fit many different ecological roles. They can be as small as the bumblebee bat in Southeast Asia, which is the smallest known mammal in the world, all the way up to flying foxes, which is just a general term for several species of fruit-eating bats. And these guys can reach more than 2 pounds. So next slide. As a group, bats are classified in the order Chiroptera, and they began evolving separate from carnivores, ungulates, and whales more than 60 million years ago. The term Chiroptera is derived from the Greek words for hand and wing. Bats are the only mammals that are truly able to fly, and they're very good at it. Most bats fly at relatively slow to moderate speeds, even hovering in the air at times. But there are a few that can fly faster than any bird, reaching horizontal speeds of up to 100 miles an hour. All bats are nocturnal and they can use echolocation, but many of the fruit bats do use vision more than echolocation to navigate. All bats have excellent vision, but they are also able to navigate in complete and total darkness using only their echolocation. Different species have different social structures, but generally they are either colonial, which means they like to hang out in groups, or they are solitary and they usually hang out alone. The size of bat colonies can be just a few individuals that are snuggled together, or they can be thousands or even millions of individuals all sheltering together in the same feature. One of the most famous sites in the US is Bracken Cave in Texas, which is home to 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats. And unlike other mammals their size, bats are relatively long-lived, and in the wild they can survive anywhere from 10 to 30 years. They also have a relatively low reproductive rate, with most females only raising one pup every year or every other year. There are a few species that can have twins, but that is rare. Next slide, please. So besides having the superpowers of flight and echolocation, nearly all bats can let their body temperature match that of the ambient air around them, or they can use their own energy to keep their body warmer or cooler than the ambient temperature. Since they can switch between this ectothermic and endothermic behavior, they are considered facultative endotherms. And this ability allows them to conserve their valuable energy reserves without having to carry a massive amount of extra fat. Bats use ectothermy in two different ways. When conditions are warm enough, bats will tend to seek out microsites where the ambient temperature is ideal for remaining alert and active. But when conditions are too cold for them, their activity and their metabolism will slow down and they will fall into torpor. And during torpor, the animal's heart rate, respiration, and other body functions slow down or shut off completely. This can be useful for surviving hibernation through the long winter, but it also means that they are vulnerable to external threats while they are essentially incapacitated. So with these abilities to fly and use torpor, bats have been able to exploit a very wide variety of habitats. There are some species that live year-round in colder climates where they use hibernation to get through the winter while they live off their fat reserves. There are other species that migrate to warmer latitudes in the wintertime. And then there are still others that just never leave those warmer climates where they can find food throughout the year. Although most folks know that bats fly around at night, many people don't know where bats spend their days. Some species will roost in caves and abandoned mines because they offer the right temperature and safety from predators. But bats will also find the right conditions in rock crevices of cliff faces or in nooks under talus slopes. They will crawl into hollow trees or underneath the bark of old snags. And then some prefer just to hang out in the foliage of trees and large shrubs, and others have adapted to using human structures like buildings and bridges. Next slide, please. So if we zoom into North America, we find that there are 44 species of bats native to the United States. Most of them are insectivorous, like this Yuma myotis. You can see up here in the corner eating a moth. But there are 3 species like this lesser long-nosed bat that also eat pollen, nectar, and fruit from cacti and agaves in the southwestern deserts. The Southwest is also the part of North America that supports the highest species richness of bats because of its latitude, topography, landmass, and vegetation types. Next slide. There are 19 species of bats known to occur in Colorado, and they are all insectivorous. Since our state is situated across the Rocky Mountains, we have some of the more eastern species and some of the more western species in North America. For example, on the left here, you see an eastern red bat, which is a type of tree bat that roosts only in the foliage of trees and shrubs. It is very common east of the Great Plains, but it can also use the cottonwood forests that grow along the rivers like the South Platte and the Arkansas River, all the way up into the foothills. This bat is migratory and solitary, and it's one of the species that can have twins. And then on the right here, we have a big free-tailed bat, which lives in the canyon and desert country of the Southwest from California to Texas and Mexico. This bat is colonial, and it roosts in cracks of tall cliffs. They are probably migratory to some extent, but their seasonal movement has not been very well studied. You might also guess from the shape of their long, narrow wings that these bats are very fast flyers. They are bigger bats that hunt high up in the air for large beetles, bugs, and moths. Then there are other smaller bats with the shorter, broader wings that are better at flying very slow and maneuvering around and underneath tree canopies. Next slide, please. So although many of the bats have more localized ranges either to the east or the west or the north or the south in North America, there are a few species that are almost ubiquitous across the continent. These are 2 bats that belong to 2 different genera, but they are both able to use a variety of different habitat types, so they've been able to occupy a large part of North America. The big brown bat on the left is sort of like the coyote of the bat world. They can tolerate a really wide range of climate conditions, and they have adapted very well to human-built environments. They are colonial, and they can roost almost anywhere. They are not migratory, but in the north part of the range, they will hibernate through the winter, and in the southern part of the range, they will stay active through the winter. They weigh about 17 grams, and they eat things like larger beetles, bugs, and moths. Then on the right is the little brown bat, who will roost also almost anywhere in structures from caves to mines, snags. They are commonly found in buildings and even underneath bridges. They are colonial and non-migratory, but they remain further north and they must hibernate. They weigh about 7 grams and they eat smaller insects like mosquitoes, yay, and midges and small moths. Next slide, please. So here are a few more species that we have on Pike National Forest. There's the hoary bat, which is one of our largest bats in Colorado. It is migratory and solitary. And interestingly, during their migration, the sexes will also split up across the country during the summer. The females mostly go to the east, and then the males will mostly go to the west of the Rockies. They roost only in the foliage of trees and shrubs, and their really beautiful coloration serves to camouflage them. They look often very much like a pine cone or just a dried leaf in the canopy. There's the silver-haired bat, which is widespread across the US and Canada. They are also usually solitary, but they can form maternity colonies of females with their young. They will commonly roost in snags or at the entrance to caves or mines, or in rock crevices, or in open buildings like a shed or a barn. They are sort of migratory, but they do also hibernate here in Colorado. They weigh about 12 grams, and they eat a whole variety of medium-sized insects. Then we also have the long-eared myotis, which is a small forest-dwelling bat that is very good at flying slow and plucking insects off the foliage of trees and shrubs. With their longer ears, they will even stop echolocating altogether and will just listen for the sounds of their prey so that they can sneak up and snap a bug right off of its leaf. They're associated with ponderosa pine forests in the western United States, and they will roost in snags, caves, mines, and other similar structures. I think of them as being also very similar in habits to flycatchers in the way that they hunt their prey. In the bottom left is the Brazilian or Mexican free-tailed bat. These guys are highly colonial, always roosting in groups of hundreds or thousands or even millions of individuals. And Colorado includes just the very northern part of their range. Usually they're more typically associated with warmer climates like what we have in our deserts in the US, and then in the tropics from here down to South America. And then finally, there's also the Townsend's big-eared bat, which is a species of concern because they are strongly reliant on caves and mines for their hibernation sites. And their small summer colonies in caves and mines or buildings can be easily disturbed. They specialize in eating moths, and even though they are widely distributed across Western North America, they are not common anywhere. Next slide. So on the top here is the fringed myotis, which is a Western species found in lower elevations and with woodlands, and they'll make their way up even into ponderosa pine forest. They form small colonies, and they will roost under bark or in caves or mines, and occasionally in buildings. They are not very migratory, and similar to the Townsend's big-eared bat, they are widely distributed in the continent, but not common anywhere. The long-legged myotis is able to tolerate colder summer temperatures than other bats, so they actually are found at our higher elevations, almost up to tree line. They can roost in trees and buildings and caves and mines, and they hibernate in caves, mines, and even in talus slopes. The western small-footed myotis is one of our smallest bats on the Pike National Forest. They only get to about 4 grams, and they are colonial and can roost almost anywhere. They also hibernate in caves and mines, and probably also in rock fissures, and they're widespread and common across North America. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about bats and humans. I am frequently asked about diseases in bats and humans, and this is generally known as zoonoses. Zoonoses are diseases that make animals and people sick. There are some, though, that make only some of the hosts sick. So there's like avian influenza makes birds sick, generally does not make people sick. Salmonella can make people sick, but generally does not make the animals sick. There's Lyme disease, West Nile virus, the plague, hantavirus, anthrax. These are all zoonoses. The big one that everybody knows about is rabies, which can infect and kill any mammal. However, there are certain groups that are more likely to transmit the virus and become reservoirs where the virus can persist. And in the US and Canada, the most common rabies reservoirs are bats, foxes, skunks, and raccoons. There are oral vaccine programs that work well to control rabies in urban populations of mesocarnivores where there are outbreaks. So most people don't cross paths with a sick fox or a skunk or a raccoon. And countries like the US have nearly eliminated rabies in dogs and cats with really strict vaccination requirements and successful animal control programs. But unfortunately, there are no vaccine programs for wild bats. But never fear, because infection rates among bats is very, very low, less than half of 1%. So all of the bats that you see flying around in the night sky or roosting quietly under the eaves are all perfectly healthy. Then there's, of course, the other disease we're all acutely aware of, the novel coronavirus that causes the human disease of COVID-19. And research has indicated that the predecessor of the COVID-19 virus probably originated in a horseshoe bat in Asia, but that original virus went through a transformation in one or more intermediate hosts that allowed a new virus to emerge that then became infectious in people. So it is not at all possible for people to get COVID directly from any bat. So I know that, of course, all of you folks care a lot about the animals and the environments around you. So I imagine some of you are wondering about, what do you do if you see a bat that's in distress? I would say, first of all, protect yourself. Although bats are very small and they aren't going to tear off your fingers, they do have sharp teeth and they can be very bitey. A bat that can't fly away could very well be sick. So you should use something to protect your hands while you gently place the bat in a box with some fabric and padding. You can call the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department and they will help you get the bat to a wildlife rehabber. You should also call CPW if you ever find a dead bat so they can determine the cause of death. CPW is tracking the spread of a disease that has been killing North American bats by the millions since 2006. Next slide, please. And that is white nose syndrome, which is a bat disease caused by a cold-adapted fungus called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, or PD for short. It was first detected in caves in Albany, New York in 2006, and it appears like a white powdery-looking substance on the bat's skin, most noticeable on the bat's wings and muzzle. And since 2006, white nose has been spreading across the continent, primarily by bat-to-bat contact, but also probably unintentionally assisted by humans. Every state and province in the US and Canada is monitoring for the presence of PD spores and the white nose infections. Typically, we've seen that PD spores are detected in the local bat population about 1 to 2 years before any bats are found exhibiting the signs of actual white nose syndrome disease. And unfortunately, in 2022, Colorado had its first detections of PD spores. One site is at Bent's Old Fort in Otero County, and the other site is up in Larimer County. So in some places where the disease has gotten well established, there are entire colonies of millions of bats that have been wiped out in 1 or 2 winters. The spores are very hardy and can survive all sorts of inhospitable conditions to be transported on fur or in soil or on clothing to new places where distant conditions are suitable for growth. We don't know exactly where it came from or exactly how it got here to North America, but it is likely transmitted somehow from Europe or Asia. It's been found on bats over there, but not with the same devastating effects like is seen here in North America. White nose is kind of like athlete's foot because the fungus grows into the bat's skin, not just on the surface of their skin. However, it's different from athlete's foot in that PD only grows in cold, humid conditions, which is exactly like the hibernation conditions of all of our bats. Bats that hibernate are susceptible to white nose because their body temperature is only a few degrees above freezing while they are in torpor, and then their immune system is turned off for several months. So PD is not toxic to the bats. Instead, it causes the bats to repeatedly browse from torpor to scratch and move around. And this extra activity uses up a lot of their stored energy. And if they wake up from torpor too much, then the bat will die from starvation before the winter is over. So although mortality rates at individual sites can be very close to 100%, individual bats can get lucky and survive the winter. And if they do, their immune system can clear the infection in the summer, but it's unknown how much that effort affects their ability to prepare for the next winter. It's also unknown if some bat species need those large hibernation colonies to persist in the long run. We don't know how severely white nose is going to affect the bat populations in Colorado, but we are going to continue monitoring the fungus, the disease, and bat population trends for the foreseeable future. And in the meantime, we will also continue to do what we can to minimize or eliminate other stressors on bats. Next slide, please. So these other stressors on bats include habitat destruction, which can take many forms, like filling in abandoned mines that host maternity or hibernating colonies, or vandalism that disturbs bats in caves, or improperly excluding bats from buildings. Other threats include poorly designed and operated wind turbines. Migrating bats face all the same risks, or most of the same risks as migrating birds, including wind turbines. And then, of course, with bats, there's always the risk of direct persecution just because they are, as a group, so misunderstood by the general public. And then overseas, in some places, there is a risk to some species from unregulated hunting. So we all need to keep in mind that bats help us with their natural, free, and very effective insect pest control. A lot of bats are pollinators, including for valuable crops such as agave. They will also disperse seeds. The fruit-eating bats are imperative for a lot of plants to spread their seeds in tropical environments. And then, of course, bats also have helped us a lot in medical advancements. Commonly referred to as vampire bats, and the saliva that they produce as anticoagulant has helped people with blood clots. So yay for that. Next slide, please. So here are some suggestions for how each one of us, can help bats. So I would say, first of all, observe bats. Spend some time in the evening looking up into the sky and just watching the bats as they go about their business of eating bugs. It's fascinating, and it'll get you thinking about bats more often. And then also tell everyone how great and important bats are. We have got to continue to fight all of the myths about how scary bats are. They're not scary at all. They help us a lot. And if you see an injured bat, please contact Colorado Parks and Wildlife. They have wildlife rehabbers actually that specialize in helping bats. You can also just now check out the new Colorado Bat Watch website and sign up yourself to learn more about and report bat observations. And I'll have links to some more web pages at the end of this presentation. You can even plant a pollinator garden. Even though our bats here in Colorado are all insectivorous, a diverse insect community that is supported by a wide variety of flowering plants provides more foods for bats, especially in urban environments. And then also think about how you take care of your lawn and your trees and your ornamental plants, and avoid broad application of insecticides. Advocate for bird and bat-friendly wind energy. There are a ton of new wind farms that are planned for eastern Colorado, and there are designs and operation strategies that electric companies can employ to limit the injuries to bats and birds. But those companies actually really need to hear that expectation from their consumers and from local governments. The last thing we want to do is try to pit bat conservation against green energy. So we need to find the compromise. And then finally, just let bats be. Humans and bats are all better off if we give bats their space. Next slide. So here I've just listed a couple of different online resources that anybody can check out to find more information about bats in general or bats here in Colorado. CSU hosts a website for the Colorado Bat Working Group that has all kinds of details about the bat species in our state. And then that second line is for Colorado Bat Watch, which just launched this month. So I encourage you to go check that site out and maybe even sign up to report some of your observations of bats that you just see in your day-to-day life. Then there's also the North American Bat Monitoring Program that is going on throughout Canada and the United States. That's a fascinating effort for people that want to get a little bit more geeky about the technology used to monitor bats. And then finally, Bat Conservation International is a great resource for all things bats around the world. So with that, I just have my closing slide, and thank you for your attention. Bree, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I have this incredible memory of when we lived in Arizona, and it is in southern Arizona. It is incredibly hot in the evenings, deep late into the evenings, like even 8 and 9 p.m. And a lot of us would walk in our neighborhoods, and right at dusk, there would be huge, do we call them swarms? What are the groups of, how do you refer to these groups of bats? Are they swarms? Are they, what is the,
Yes.
is that correct?
Yeah, generally it is referred to as a swarm. Yeah, generally it is referred to as a swarm. Yeah, generally it is referred to as a swarm. Generally it is referred to as a swarm.
Sorry. Okay. I also, sorry, I have a lot of questions from our watchers tonight, and I have a few things. Terry, at the beginning of the program, has a comment. He says, Terry says, the exodus of the Mexican free-tailed bat from under the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas is amazing. They go one column at a time like little soldiers. Can you speak to that? Do you know about that particular species of bat?
I do. Those are Mexican free-tailed bats. I've seen that exit myself as well. It is amazing. Yeah, and the city of Austin was capitalized on that event too. Yeah, all Mexican free-tailed bats.
That's awesome. Yeah, just and having that memory of seeing the bats in their swarm coming out at dusk. It's just kind of a images of summer in southern Arizona. It was, and people were very used to them. It was like a flock of birds.
Oh yeah,
like a flock of bats.
Yeah, definitely. Those populations in Texas, they've tracked their movements across, throughout the larger area around Austin, and estimated the number of corn earworm moths that they consume per night. I don't know the exact statistics, but it's a staggering amount of insects that those couple of colonies consume.
So I have some other questions. Let's see. How do bats these are a series of questions. How do bats navigate in the dark? Do they
They're
carry rabies? What crops do they pollinate? Why do bats hang upside down?
Right. Let's start at the top. How do bats navigate in the dark? They use echolocation, which is basically they yell. Bats produce a noise either through their mouth or through their nose with their voice box. That's at a very high frequency and very, very loud. We can't hear it because it's at a frequency that's above the ability of humans to hear, but the intensity of the noise has been likened to that of a jackhammer, essentially. So this tiny little creature is producing a very, very loud sound. Those those sound waves travel out in front of the bat and hit objects in front of them, and then bounce back to the bat. And the bat's ears pick up that sound, and their brain is specially evolved to translate that echo information actually into an image in their mind. So it's sort of like seeing in the dark with a flashlight, only you are hearing or you're seeing with your ears, essentially.
Okay.
And
How
they
is
can
that?
tell
Mhm.
how, if an object is traveling away from them or towards them, or how large it is, and that sort of thing.
So is that particular type of sonar, how is that different from other animals of flight? Birds, for example. How is that different from birds?
Most birds, the vast majority of birds, do not echolocate. Birds use vision only, or if they use hearing, like I think there's a couple species of swifts maybe that might use a form of echolocation, but for the most part, birds are visually oriented, just like humans are.
What crops do bats pollinate?
Typically, it's more the fruit-eating bats that are pollinators, or pollen-eating bats. So in southwestern United States, the lesser long-nosed bat is an example that pollinates agave plants and also saguaro cactus plants. And in the tropics, they pollinate things like mangoes and avocados. Some of those larger fruit producing trees depend on bats for pollination.
What is the best method to remove a bat safely from your home?
It depends on the exact situation. I guess I would say if that person has a specific question, they are best off calling CPW and asking about that. I will say that removing a bat from your house can be as simple as just opening a door and
Yes.
and being quiet and letting the bat eventually find its way out, or putting a towel over it and transporting it outside. If you have an actual colony that's roosting in the attic of a house, that requires a little bit more preparation, but generally it's best to have a situation where the bats are excluded during the fall or in the winter time when they're not actually in the house, and you go around and you seal up all of the places where bats might be getting in, and then when they come back in the spring, they can't get back into the house. You can also call exterminators that use bat-friendly methods for excluding bats from the house, but please, please, please don't use lethal means to.
So it's best if you can call someone to have them removed safely. That is the preferred method of
Yeah, if you're
removal, other
dealing with.
than opening the door or let them leaving on their own accord.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And if there's people have more specific questions about them, I can point them to
Okay.
more detailed
Yes,
resources.
I've gone ahead and placed most of those links that you mentioned in the very end slide in both of our feed on Facebook and YouTube, so people can refer to those later um, if they want to just commit those to memory or have those at hand.
Yep.
So there's two more questions. Why do bats hang upside down?
That is a great question, and it's a matter of convenience, really. The way that bats take flight, they are able to take off from the ground, or I should say, most of the smaller bats are able to take off from the ground, but the vast majority of bats are actually they're too heavy to take off from the ground. And so they have to drop from a height, whether they're hanging from a tree or whether they're hanging from a cliff face. They need to drop first before they can build up enough speed to generate lift underneath their wings to take off. So they've evolved to just spend all of their casual time hanging around by their toes. And actually, their tendons are situated in a way where when they're at rest, their toes curl in, and it actually takes effort and muscle power to open their feet so that they can let go to start flying.
And our last question, do bats drink blood?
There are 3 species of bats that do survive completely and 100% off of the blood of other animals. Those are vampire bats. They are all found in South America in the tropics, and they generally will they consume blood. They've evolved to consume blood mostly from birds. So birds will be perched on a branch. You can imagine a toucan sitting on a branch overnight in South America, minding its own business. It's asleep. And the bat will land on a branch in the tree next to the bird and will actually walk up to the bird that's asleep. And the bat will make a very tiny incision in the foot of the bird with their teeth. They have very sharp incisors, and they will make a little slice on the toe of the bird, and then blood starts to just slowly drip out, and the bats will lap up that blood as it runs down the toe of the bird. They've also been able to adapt to feeding off of cattle, standing out in a pasture overnight. There are instances of vampire bats feeding on humans, but it's very uncommon.
You mentioned that there are some bats that could go at 100 miles per hour. Or up to 100 miles per hour. What
Mhm.
would be the situation in which a bat would need to have that much speed?
So that is actually that's going to be the Mexican free-tailed bat and the big free-tailed bat. Those narrow wings, very high flyers. They're hundreds of feet up in the air, and they're flying after large beetles that are being carried on the updrafts in the higher air columns. And it's a matter of efficiency and surprise more than anything.
Okay. So
It's
that would
not.
be in a hunting situation is
Yes.
when they would approach those speeds.
Yep.
And those
Yep.
those particular types of bats would approach that speed.
Yes, and there are actually also some of insects have evolved kind of a bat deterrent system. So insects have ears, or at least they have membranes that are able to detect the higher frequencies that bats use to echolocate. And if the insect hears that sound behind them, then they'll go into an evasive maneuver to try and escape being eaten. And if the bat is able to fly fast enough or use a different frequency that the insects can't hear, that'll increase their chances of success.
Okay. Well, that is all of the
I have a quick question for
Yay,
you.
yes, Peggy, yay, thank you.
Um,
I I'm glad you're
my
back with us.
audio was really messed up, and so I was hearing your narrative, and then it would repeat again, and so it was just garbled. And I was worried that everybody else was having the problem, but I think it's just mine. But it seems to be cleared up at the moment. So my question is, hanging upside down, lots of blood rushes to the head. So bats must have adapted their circulatory system in some way. How did they adapt that?
They do, yes. If you and I were to spend more than about 10 minutes hanging upside down, we'd probably black out.
Right.
So actually, it's not all that different from humans. It's just reversed. So bats have in their blood vessels essentially sphincters that contract and keep the blood from piling up into their brain. So similar, we have the same thing in our legs and our feet.
Legs, right.
Yep. It's just that bats have it the other way around.
How interesting. They are really an interesting species.
Yeah, they are fascinating.
And because my audio was messed up, I couldn't tell. Did you address how many pups a female bat would have?
Yeah, typically they're relatively have a relatively low reproductive rate. One female will have one pup, maybe one or every other year. So on average, less than one pup per female per year. There are a couple of species that are capable of having twins, but that's the exception.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
So, Michael, I have one last question. If someone was interested in observing bats or going to look at sea bats, what would be the best situation, time of year, and environment here in southern Colorado that that would be a good observation area or time to watch?
My favorite place to watch bats is in the park by my house, or even sometimes in my backyard, or on my street in front of my house. So bats are they're attracted to wherever insects are, and generally in arid environments like ours, especially in southeastern Colorado, there are more insects closer to water. So any kind of little creek or even a little dry wash that has a little higher humidity in it, where you have a little bit more lush vegetation, you're going to have a slightly higher amount of insects, and those bats are going to be targeting those areas as well. So in the summertime, like June and July and August, those are the best times of the year to be observing bats while they're just flying around, foraging, doing their thing. So right around sunset, after the sun goes down, while the sky is still a little bit light, you can see the bats silhouetted against the light sky.
Are bats still frequenting the Orient Mine in the San Luis Valley?
They are, yes. That's a very large colony, approximately maybe 200,000 Mexican free-tailed bats that live in the Orient Mine. Yep, and it's open to the public. It's best to contact the Orient Land Trust, Orient Mine Land Trust. They have a website that tells you all about how to watch their bats.
Great.
Fantastic. Well, if Peg, you don't have anything else, I have really enjoyed your presentation, Michael, and I appreciate you being here so much and educating us about bats. And thank you so much, Peggy, for being here as well. And I wish you all the best, and I thank you so much for a wonderful show tonight.
Michael and Bree. Thank you both. Great presentation. Lots of interesting information.
Yes.
Thanks for hanging in there with me.
You bet. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.